For being here. Wow, what a wonderful crowd. Thank you for being here. I am Nitin Vesh. I am part of the leadership team of MIT Energy and Transportation track, and really thrilled to be seeing many familiar faces and also many first-timers. So thank you for being here and spending the evening with us. I think we have a great topic today. To get things started, I just want to thank Park for their generous support of the club overall. And Park actually engages with the ecosystem in many different ways by doing contract research for large corporations, also doing incubation for early stage companies, and they're always hiring talent in the areas of research. Jesse, who's our contact person, is not here physically, but if any of these things jive with you, her email is down there. Please reach out to her and have a discussion. To get things started, I'll just use a couple of slides to tee the topic up before Mark and our panelists come on the stage. And the viewpoint is actually to lay out what is the current state of transportation as a framework. And if you look at this, in the US, almost 40,000 people are killed every year in car accidents. That number worldwide is more than 1 million people. Safety with car ownership is a big problem. At the same time, we have our cars, which are utilized for roughly 5% of the time in a given day. However, in urban areas and cities, we have almost a third of our land, which is devoted to parking and for cars, which is pretty mind-boggling that we have a third of our land space devoted to an asset which is utilized for barely 5% of the time. I think along with that, what is happening with electrification, especially around the cost of lithium-ion batteries, which have come down by almost 70% in past 5 years, we are seeing a wave of transformation with electrification. If you're like me and have lost your hair in solar industry, the kind of learning rate we are seeing with lithium-ion batteries is very comparable to what we saw with solar, which I think is very, very compelling. At the same time, I think these vehicles are evolving from being just hardware-focused to becoming more complicated with elements around software. In a typical vehicle today, there is 150 million lines of code, which was not the case even 5-10 years back. And then lastly, if you start thinking about Uber and Lyft, though the companies have grown rapidly, have disrupted how we think about ride sharing, the amount of miles which are traveled on these platforms is still 0.1% of total miles which are traveled in the country every year. So my take actually is the current state of transportation is not sustainable. Whether one is an OEM or a tier supplier, or even like individuals like us who are like owning a vehicle, or even urban planners as you think about urban landscape, things have to change to make it more sustainable. And I think what we are seeing is wave of innovation in what we've been calling as ACEs, things which are becoming more automated, more connected, more electric, and shared. To just give a couple of data points, with automation, I think the amount of innovation which is happening both at the hardware level with sensors, with compute platform, and also with software, with things like perception, high-definition maps, and also motion planning, essentially to become an operating layer for these vehicles as they're becoming more automated. It's pretty astounding. At the same time, we are seeing the floodgates of data which is opening up, not just with all the sensors in a car, but also as these cars are communicating with each other and also with the infrastructure. I think by some estimates, the amount of data which a typical autonomous car will generate every day, is about 4 terabytes. Also around electrification, I think, so we saw the cost around lithium-ion batteries, but we have about 5 million vehicles, electric vehicles on road today. It took us almost 20 years to get first million. It took us less than 6 months to get the last million. And depending on which analyst you look at, in next 2 to 3 years, we'll be at a point where total cost of ownership of electric vehicle will be at parity or better compared to internal combustion-based engine. And lastly, the innovation around sharing with different business models, be it ride-hailing, ride-sharing, car sharing, we're just getting started. And I think the panel we have today is, we are very delighted to have both Chris and Sterling to be with us today, given their background and their personal history, and also their company, Aurora, which is driving innovation around a number of these themes. So we'll get going. One item around logistics. We'll have a fireside chat, and we will have open Q&A after the fireside chat. So if you have questions, please hold them for the Q&A session. It's my privilege, and I'm really delighted to have Mark Petschon as our moderator. Mark is a really good friend, a serial Silicon Valley CEO turned VC. He was a founder of a lithium-ion battery company called Amprius, was a partner at venture funds like Vantage Point and Birchmeier, and also was the founder of BMW's iVentures team in Silicon Valley. Some of his portfolio companies include Tesla, Peloton, which is doing truck platooning, Nado, which is focused on driver safety and fleet applications. Mark is currently managing director of a new fund called Icebreaker Ventures, which is pulling together a small group of companies, large corporates together, so that we can become more active around supporting early stage companies in the theme of ACES. With that, Mark, floor is yours, and I look forward to it.
Thrilled to be here. All right, real quick vote. You can vote once. Who's here to hear me? Who's here to hear them? Excellent. This is a great week for fireside chats. Davos just ended. I don't know if anybody saw Fareed Zakaria interview Jane Goodall. And that was, look it up, it's an amazing interview. She's an amazing lady. He's a master interviewer, of course. But the thing that got me hooked on it, and I wanted to just bring it up here, was her point was, we're not borrowing, we didn't inherit the earth from our parents, and we're not borrowing it from our kids, we're stealing it from our kids, and it's time to pay it back. And working on electrification of transportation and improving efficiency of smart transportation, smart cities, smart grid, agriculture, and all the way down the line is sort of a mandate that I think a lot of us in the room buy into. And so I'm thrilled to kind of tee up some topics for these guys to hit out of the park. But thanks for being here for this. Welcome. Hi, guys. Hi. This is awesome. To get this started, I'm not sure everybody knows you except by sort of name in the press. So maybe we can take, I mean, you guys had the 2 best jobs in the whole industry when you were at Google and Tesla. And you, right?
No, we now have the best jobs.
And you gave them up to create new jobs. Take a couple of minutes to frame who you are and what you did and why you made that choice.
I'm going first?
You do it.
Yeah. Well, first, thanks for coming tonight. Thank you to Xerox PARC for having us here. This is incredible to be somewhere so kind of steeped in history. I've never had the chance to be here before, so I guess on the one hand, it kind of looks like the old computer science building at Carnegie Mellon, but there's also a deep history here too, so that's fantastic. So for me, I guess I'm Chris. At least the name tag says so. I've been working in self-driving cars probably for the last 15 years. I was at Carnegie Mellon in the Robotics Institute there when the DARPA Grand Challenges got announced, and these were these robot races across the desert. I had been working on much slower robots before that, a robot for exploring the Arctic and the Atacama Desert that moved at 15 centimeters a second. Well, actually about as fast as I walk now. And I got a chance to go work on something driving 50 miles an hour across the desert. That sounded cool. And then over the last 15 years, it's gone from that sounds cool to, crap, this really is cool. But understanding the kind of the implications of what we're building as technology, right? And we see that in the mission we have for Aurora, which is delivering the benefits of self-driving technology safely, quickly, and broadly. I had the good fortune for about 7.5 years to be at Google, to be there to help found the self-driving car program that's now called Waymo. Built that when we started. There was about 6 of us, and when I left, there was 600 and something people reporting to me. And so it was an incredible privilege to be part of that group and to help kind of seed some of the ideas that now seem to be turning into an industry, or at least we're trying to make an industry. And I guess about 3 years ago now, 2.5, 3 years ago, decided to leave. And it was really, for me, it had been a great run, and it was time to go figure out what was next in life. And as I spent some time talking with folks outside of the kind of the Google sphere, if you will, I came to the conclusion there was a chance to actually help accelerate this to market. And start to save those 1.3 million people that were mentioned earlier, and to give access to mobility to more people, and to do that in a way that was collaborative with the automotive industry and accelerate it. And in exploring this, I found some amazing like-minded folks in Sterling, who's here tonight, and he can tell you his story. And then our third co-founder, Drew Bagnell, who's in Pittsburgh, freezing his butt off apparently as the polar vortex descends. But the two of us had known each other for a long time, and here we are with Aurora, trying to move this industry forward.
Yeah. So my journey in this industry started it was inspired about 14 years ago when I was just going into my senior year of undergrad. My younger brother was struck while on a four-wheeler in south central Idaho by a car traveling about 50 miles an hour, driven by a 15-year-old, which is okay to do in Idaho. Threw him through the air about 30 meters. He landed on his head in a ditch and broke his neck. He survived, fortunately, but that was a pretty transformative experience for me, right at about a time when I was trying to figure out what came next. So I joined forces with a couple of folks at MIT, Carl Yama, John Leonard, all of which sort of joined my committees. We developed what became known as the Intelligent Copilot, which was at the time a sort of parallel automation system designed to allow for sort of adaptive shared control of human-machine systems to extend what at the time were fairly basic or simple sort of one-dimensional driver assistance systems into more dimensions, higher fidelity. So we developed that. We attempted to start a company. This was in the early days, and such a company was not particularly want for a lot of pickup at the time. I left there, went to McKinsey for a couple of years, left McKinsey to go to Tesla. Was asked to run the Model X program, did that until we launched it in 2015, at which point was asked to take over Autopilot as well. And we launched that a couple of generations, and several software releases later learned pretty intensely what it means to support a product in this space, even when that product is not entirely self-driving, and more importantly, when the public thinks it might be, which was part of the trick, honestly, we were dealing with. And right about that, Chris and I had known of each other back when I was at MIT. He was at Carnegie Mellon. We had met at one point here in California when I was still at MIT, and we'd stayed in touch through the years. I think
it's been about 10 years.
He was. We were both at the helms of some of the programs that were trying to push this technology forward, and I remember calling Chris for advice on a couple of occasions for hey man, how do you think about obviously not conflating technical approaches, but how do you think about some of these societal challenges that we're facing and some of the sort of pressures that we're under? So we stayed in touch through that, and then I think after Chris left Google, we got lunch one day and started to think about, what would it look like if we started to consolidate some of the better talent in the industry and sort of started a company that could actually do what we've been trying to do for the better part of the last decade.
So in your elevator pitch, what is the mission of this company? What is it?
Yeah, it's to deliver the benefits of self-driving technology safely, quickly, and broadly. And we chose that pretty deliberately. We had, in fact, I think we have a whole document somewhere where we were talking about how we best, most concisely express what it is we care about, right? And at the end of the day, the technology is really cool. It's really fascinating. It's really fun to work on. But it's really the benefits that technology brings, starting with safety, but extending, particularly in self-driving, as relative to some of these driver assistance programs, beyond safety into various elements of efficiency, right? Efficient utilization of our cities, efficient utilization of our assets, giving access to transportation to those who don't currently have it in a society that's really evolved around requiring it. So these were some of the things that we, thought were important, and that became sort of the mission statement for the company that we try to hold to.
Yeah, no, and I think it's exciting, right? Like that safely, quickly, broadly, even that ordering of things was very deliberate for us, right? We, literally we wanted to put safety first. We think that's kind of table stakes in delivering it, and we think that is what comes along, honestly, for the ride with delivering self-driving vehicles. One of the challenges with driver assistance systems is that it's hard to convince people to.
All right.
I feel warmer already. I'm actually not convinced. It might be greenhouse gas efficient. But
I prefer this to the Sterling picture of me that was up there just a minute ago.
Was it the Sterling photo?
That was the Sterling photo, yeah.
Excellent. I had a chain of thought. It was really, I was like just getting into steam.
Importance of the sequencing of those words.
Driver assistance. So the challenge with driver assistance systems, right, is that you can pay $3,000 to get this thing that'll save your life, or you can pay $3,000 to get a really good stereo. And a lot of people choose the really good stereo. And honestly, it's not a completely irrational decision because, from their perspective, they get to enjoy the stereo every day. And the day that the ADAS system saves your life is actually a crappy day. And so, it's actually hard to convince people to buy these things. Whereas if what we can tell them is you can get in a vehicle and you get to, talk on your phone or read your messages or read a book or have a nap, and we're actually going to make you safer on top of that, right? That's something where I believe people will buy it. And so the value of this is not just safety, it's these other things that Sterling talked about.
So you were just drawing the distinction of the choices some of the legacy makers make to put infotainment systems on the lot rather than safety systems on the lot. I remember when you guys got started, now 10 years ago, and after you were at
Fireplace, yeah.
And
how long has it been?
Good Lord.
If you had your first couple of pilot cars running around, a couple of years later, I was at BMW, and I was pushing some of the new stuff, and I got this very direct response that working on autonomous cars was impossible, and it would take forever, and that Google was going to do it because they had too much money and no practical sense. and I tried to argue, but so that was then. That was 2010, 2011.
Yeah.
You couldn't get anything started at the legacy players. And then you guys started to make more and more progress. When did you scare the bejeebers out of the big guys so that they started to react and act differently and start these new projects that they've all now to put billions of dollars behind. What was the transition from they're crazy to holy shit, they're good?
I guess I don't know if we ever scared the bejesus out of them, but maybe. I think that, so first I think it's important to recognize that the automotive industry is not homogeneous, right? That there even within different companies, there are folks who kind of can see the future a bit and try to get it, and then there are folks who are excited with what they're doing right now. And so, it's important to recognize that. I think that there's, various stages that we see them move through, right? The first is like, yeah, you're crazy, why are we wasting time on that? There's no value. And then there's, hey, there might be something there, we should put 2 guys on research on it. And then at some point it's like, hey, we should get serious about this, we'll put 30 people on it. And then, crap, we're not making the progress we need to go find a solution. And so that's part of the thesis behind our company, is that we think we can get the right people together to go deliver, and then we can go work with the automotive companies, and they can do what they're extremely good at, which is understanding how to deliver this incredible thing that's a car out into the world, and we can bring to that the bit that we understand, which is the driver. For I think, back to your question, I think really the pendulum really kind of started to swing around the time where Uber kicked in, because I think before that, despite the progress that Google was making, there was some ability to look at it and think of it like a crazy person running in the wilderness, right? And so
who happens to print money in his basement? Yeah.
When you say it like that, it doesn't sound more sane. But then when the second person starts running in the wilderness, maybe they're actually running somewhere. And then General Motors made the acquisition of Cruise, and suddenly that added another stamp of kind of reality to it. And I think the automotive companies for a while have been, what was called ACES a moment ago is actually kind of the, I think of it normally as kind of 3 things that are terrifying to the automotive industry, because they're dealing with an incredible amount of disruption all at once, right? They're dealing with the change from ICE to electric, and so that's an incredible engineering change they have to deal with. They're dealing with the disruption in their business model. So whether it's Tesla going direct sale to customer, or it is companies like Uber, Lyft, Didi that are changing the way we interact with the car, right? That matters a lot, and that's really about connectivity and information asymmetry, right? The fact that in the past you couldn't know where cars were, and so the whole business didn't work. And then finally, the automation stuff that we're kind of focused on, right? And those 3 technologies coming together, I think, are things that are really going to, have been scaring the industry and helping them drive towards new business models.
So the legacy guys started to react, and now the Ubers and Lyfts and Didis are starting to have market caps and valuations that in some ways turn the industry upside down. I mean, the king of the hill for 100 years was the OEMs, and they could dictate what Tier 1s do and what Tier 2s do, and how distribution works and how regulation works. And then suddenly, they're no longer the most valuable player on the playing field. The Ubers and Lyfts and Didis have the market cap and the data and the relationship with the customer. How do you view that? And how does it affect your strategy? Because you're trying to work with, at least so far, we see you're working with Hyundai, Kia, you're working with Byton, you're working with Volkswagen. You're not visibly working with Lyft or Uber or Didi. Why are you working with the hardware guys instead of the service?
Yeah, I'll take this. So the premise of the question is a little bit off. We are working with both, but maybe let me explain why. Again, coming back to the mission of delivering the benefits of self-driving technology is very difficult. Those benefits typically are realized when someone takes a trip in a car, right? It's very difficult to have a self-driving car without a self-driving system. It is simultaneously very difficult to dispatch a self-driving car to fulfill the needs of a particular rider without the ability to connect to that driver. right? So at Aurora, we think of it, our product is building the driver, right? That driver has a number of different interfaces with various elements of this ecosystem, right? The first and longest pole, arguably, is that of adaptation of the vehicle platform and its interfaces to satisfy the requirements of that self-driver. And so what you've seen to date, and we haven't announced everything publicly, and we probably won't, but you've seen to date some interaction and engagement that we have on the OEM side. This is not, I would not confuse this with placing Aurora on the sort of tier one supplier side of the equation, simply because ultimately that driver is the one who liaises with and interacts with, fulfills demand from the TNCs. Instead, what the driver does, and what we've tried to do developmentally, is work with the OEMs to develop their platforms such as they have the interfaces required for the driver to operate them safely. There is a shorter pull effort, which is the development of the APIs such that that driver can receive requests from and fulfill demand as required by various transportation network companies. Again, so also a complex business.
You're making the TNC platform as well?
The driver communicates, no, the driver communicates with existing TNC platforms. Again, as Chris mentioned, there are players who do some of these things very well, right? Building a transportation network is not an easy undertaking, right, as we've seen. It's
a few $billion.
Enormously capital intensive, but nor is building the car, right? And this is not what we're good at, right? What we're good at is the driver, right? And so we see what we're building in that product as connecting the sort of connective tissue between all of these other elements of the ecosystem. And you know, the car doesn't move without the driver deciding it moves, right? And the car doesn't know where to move without the driver receiving a request for it.
The person or the driver robot?
The self-driver.
So I guess one way to think about what Sterling's saying is, if I came and told you today we had a self-driving kit that just worked, and you had the option of it just worked and it was properly integrated to a car, and you had to write the interface to talk to, you know, the Uber or Lyft or Didi of the world, or I told you we had a self-driving car kit today and we had all the integration to Uber and Lyft and Didi worked out. You just need to find an OEM and figure out how to integrate it to the car. Which of those which state of the world would you prefer to be in? And our model is that the OEM integration is the top hole, and so let's go and engage with those folks first and help build that, get those relationships going, and start dealing with that side of the challenge. And then as that comes together and we have the integrated system, then together with our partners, we can bring that to folks in the TNC community.
Suggests that you're on the road to believing, this is sort of the commercialization question, does this stuff happen first for fleets and TNCs? Does it happen first for freight? Does it happen first for trucks and over the highway? Does it happen for slow-speed senior communities and shuttles? There's, you know, we have all those startups here.
I was going to say, sorry if we offend someone. Landmines be present.
They all think they're first.
So a few things to think about with respect to the commercialization approach, right? We could go on all night. There are so many facets to this problem, right? Everything from the sort of, but maybe to get one of the things out of the way that I think is uncontroversial or will be for most of this crowd, and that is the best path to market for a system that's fairly expensive, that requires a feathered rollout in specific operational design domains. It's much easier to do that via fleet-based sort of ride-sharing operation than it is via ownership, right? I think that should be uncontroversial to probably everyone. If it is, you know, talk with me afterwards. I'm happy to explain more. But the couple of other things that I would say about this is, so getting out of the way, if we say, okay, we're going to start in fleets, right? And the expectation is that we're going to fulfill demand specifically in operational design domains and in geographies that we understand and that we're comfortable with and have validated the system for. We then get into a question of, okay, what operational design domains are best, right? And I would say there's probably three facets of this, right? There's the sort of commercial opportunity angle of it. I think by any measure, any of you who are working on trucks or cars or anything else, you all have a fairly strong story, right? Whether it's a $700 billion truck market in the United States, or it's
say, even larger sort of ride-sharing market ultimately bring the costs down, there are pretty good arguments, I think, for that. And so we really then fall back to two other elements of the equation, right? One is complexity, which is, I think, a fairly good proxy for time to market, and one is severity of implications should something happen, right? When we think about complexity, we think about, look, if you look at just the data that makes this correlated, right, an operation on 65 mile an hour plus roads and highways per million miles traveled on in lower speed urban type environments, I think the number is like 4 times higher in 25, 35 mile an hour operation. I mean, in fact, I think injury level crashes as measured by NHTSA are approximately 4 in 25, 35 mile an hour roads, and you go above 65 mile an hour and it drops to less than 1. The issue then, though, is that, so A, humans are already setting a higher bar on highways than they set in urban environments. So if your requirement is to be better than a human, that bar is slightly higher on a per mile traveled basis on a highway than it would be in urban environments. So that's one thing that I think is maybe a little bit more nuanced than we kind of think. But the step above that is when you're on a highway, not only is that bar higher, but the severity of an incident is also higher. Right? I think we incur on highways per million miles traveled, I think it's like a third the accident rate as it is in urban environments, and yet half of the fatal accidents occur on highway. And so as we think about these three things, so commercial opportunity, complexity of OBD, and severity of ramifications should something go wrong, I think there's a fairly compelling argument for a lot of different things. So you can imagine which direction I'm going.
Steady and slow.
You go steady and slow first, right? Because there you tend to encounter a high fraction of, you tend to encounter a high density of interesting events for which you need to train systems, right? And therefore your per mile of testing, the efficiency with which you can learn and train is much higher than it would be per mile if you were just developing a pattern.
So okay, all of your erstwhile customers, whether they're OEMs or mobility providers, at this point have concluded they have to succeed. This is now gone from crazy to imperative. It's an existential threat if you wake up in 2022 or 23 and you don't have the time. So it looks like every one of them has multiple shots on goal. They've teed up multiple internal efforts and hired a bunch of people. They've got partnerships with their traditional tier ones. They've got partnerships with all kinds of little sensor startups and software startups. They've signed on to a big cluster bleep with
not us. We don't do cluster bleeps.
So they've either signed up with Intel or with NVIDIA, and here, and Conti, and Bosch, and they've all paid in to put their logo on the page, and no one can figure out who's in charge. You're obviously the other solution, but how do and there's only so many smart guys who have your kind of experience. How can, if 20 OEMs and players each hire, 4 efforts, all the smart guys are diluted, so nobody's got critical mass. How does this work? How's it going to sort out? How are they going to succeed?
It's me, it's you.
Sorry, chime in when I screw up.
Yep.
So a couple things.
It only works the other way, by the way.
A couple of things that we think about here. First, design by committee for complex problems tends to be fraught with challenges, and tends to be a little bit difficult to sort of bring the market quickly. I think we've seen examples of this in various industries through time. As a result, we believe it's super important that the core of the driver is owned and developed internally by one group with one set of priorities, one set of objectives. for us at Aurora, we are building that constellation, that ecosystem, effectively working with the OEMs to build the platforms that will operate this driver and the transportation networks, the APIs to communicate with it. But at the end of the day, this is so complex a problem that one can't afford bespoke sort of customizations for each and every partner that's on the platform. And so to that end, our work is, the large majority of our work is focused on building that driver, on overcoming that type of hurdle. At the periphery of the product, if you will, we are designing a set of interfaces that are common, so that all of our OEM partners, our transportation network partners, can commonize on a given platform. It's naturally happening for humans, right? We all happen to have two arms that hold the wheel fairly well and two legs that are pretty well adapted to hitting pedals, and so we all sort of over time naturally adapted the interfaces such that every platform from every OEM happens to be compatible. Right? We are front-loading that compatibility question with the OEMs we work with, so that they develop the interfaces that are compatible with our driver, with the Aurora driver.
So are you doing both hardware and software for these installations?
Every vehicle that runs the Aurora driver will run hardware that's signed off by Aurora, which is a single set that we are designing at Aurora. We always won't
companies that are supplying them.
we ultimately won't manufacture that hardware, but the design of it is so intimately associated with the guarantees that we have to place around the software that development happens in-house.
Cool.
And around how does this work with an ecosystem of OEMs that have...
So does that mean all their data gets shared and all their data helps each other?
That's part of our model, yeah, is that it's their data, but by being part of this platform, as we learn something with one of our partners, our other partners benefit from that. And the whole, because what we care about is the safety of this driver. All the OEMs care very deeply about safety, and this is a really great way to amplify that. Your question before was around, OEMs having multiple shots on goal and dilution of talent. And I think we look at this from like a couple of different ways. One is that it's great that there are multiple shots on goal, right? We think we're pretty good. We think ultimately, we're going to be one of the companies that succeeds in delivering the technology. But this is too important to single-thread it, right? And so, from my perspective, it's awesome that we have a bunch of investment in this space. There's a bunch of companies working on it. Some of us are going to get it right. I'm personally betting on us, but it's great that there's a lot of fuels out there. As a company, it's also great that our partners, wow, that got very blue. Our partners, and there we go. I guess we went to sleep. Sorry about that. I guess our partners trying it out and figuring out this is really hard, and other people trying this out and figuring it's really hard is awesome, because there is nothing better than an educated customer. And if they've gone out there and tried it and failed at it, and then can come in and see what we've built and say, that is it, that actually works, I want that, we will win. So I think that's fantastic. And then around dilution of talent, this is an incredibly competitive space for talent. And when I think about what the great people want, is they want a mission they believe in, they want a leadership team they trust, and they want coworkers that they enjoy working with, and then they want to get paid in a way that's not embarrassing, right? They'd like to do well if the thing that they pour their time, their soul into, and so that's kind of what we tried to set up at Aurora. Is we've got some folks who kind of understand what we're doing in the space. We've got a great set of leaders, right? So right now, a lot of the stories about Sterling, Drew, and I founded this, blah, blah. But if you look at the great people we brought in, we've got the former vice president of software at SpaceX, runs our software team. Like, they launched land rockets, and now he's doing our software, right? That's cool. We've got one of the co-founders of Ross. Sorry?
You used to have.
We won't go there. I've heard that from more than one person. We got one of the co-founders of Ross at the company, right? And so this is somebody who understands software infrastructure for robotics and realizes Ross is not the right answer for us, and is leading our infrastructure team, right? We have one of the guys who wrote the core of HoloLens state estimation system, right? And if you know anything about augmented reality, it's all about tracking the head unit and matching that, right? And so the fact that we've got the guy who made that happen now writing, the cores of our state estimation system, right? It's awesome, right? And cat haul trucks, right? So before I left Carnegie Mellon, I was leading a program to build automated haul trucks. These are things like, well, it wouldn't fit in this room, right? The size of a house, moves at 40 miles an hour in open pit mines. And before I left to go to Google, I was leading that. When I left, other folks at Carnegie Mellon took over. They worked with Caterpillar to commercialize that, take it all the way through from it didn't work to they're selling it. So now if you happen to own an open pit mine in South America somewhere, you can buy these big haul trucks that are automated. And the core of the team that delivered that for Caterpillar now works for us at Aurora. And so that's one of the things that when we talk about dilution of talent, we're building a place where those great people want to come, where they can be successful, where we can do something awesome.
All right, let's switch to some technology talk.
Oh, come on.
This is the level 3 question. All right, you're famous for saying, I don't know, everybody's probably seen this, right?
Bravo.
That you don't learn to fly by jumping higher and higher.
Yep.
Where'd you get that? It's a great story still. And I think you take that and extrapolate it to say, you can't go from level 2 to level 4 by just going stepwise, jumping a little higher, working a little harder, getting a little smarter, and suddenly 2 becomes 3 becomes 4. It's different. Talk about that some more, because there's a whole lot of people in the room who are working on level 3, and there's a lot of us who believe that's crazy.
Yeah. So let's take level 3 aside, because I'm not convinced that's a real thing. But let's talk about the thesis behind that. So one of the historic prevailing schools of thought was we'll just keep making driver assistance systems better, and ultimately they'll be good enough that they just drive the car. And I think that sounds really appealing until you start to think about the business pressures that come to bear. And so it turns out if you go talk to a tier 1 and you ask them about their forward collision mitigation braking system, they will tell you the false positive rate of that system, because that is a requirement for them, right? If you're driving your expensive BMW and it hits the brake when there's nothing in front of you on the freeway, that's terrifying. And then what happens is you call the dealer and complain, and then the dealer calls the company, and then they stop selling that thing. And so there's a rate at which it's acceptable for it to false positive. If you ask the same tier 1, what's the false negative rate? How often does the system miss an obstacle in the road? They literally cannot provide you an answer. And that's because there isn't a requirement for that. The requirement is that they meet the Euro NCAP or the NCAP standard on a specified course. And they have to demonstrate they can do that, and it's a real test, and it is certainly representative. But they don't really know what the false negative rate is. And so that means that they're not driving that number down, right? They're not investing in it. What they're actually doing is they're told every year, that thing that you sold us for $50 last year, this year you need to sell it for us for $49. Because we have this plan for this model that we're going to drive cost out of it over time. And so the effort on driver assistance system is not about making it better necessarily for any given technology. It's about making it more economic. And this actually makes a ton of sense, because if we had forward collision mitigation braking systems out there, and let's say it worked half the time, right? It ignored half, it had a false negative rate of 1/2. That would still be as effective as seatbelts, right? Like that's a big deal. And so, basically the economic pressures, the technology pressures are not trying to make driver assistance capabilities better. Instead, what we need to do when we build a self-driving car is we need to build a system where we care about false positives and false negatives, at least equally. And so it's a different set of technology. You have to use things like, instead of just using forward-looking radar and camera, You might have to fold in laser. You might have to fold in more of them to have redundancy. Otherwise, you just won't get there. And so I think these are just very different technology tracks. And if you talk to the OEMs today, they're treating them as different technology tracks. They're literally separate programs for the companies.
Maybe just chiming in on the business measures. I felt this very intensely years ago, in developing a level 2 system, attempting simultaneously to develop a level 4 system. I think one of the things that I think is important to note on the business models that this tends to drive is if you're developing a level 4 system, you're going to have a fundamentally different both set of technical objectives, like driving down both false negatives and false positives, but also commercial realities that you're going to sort of orient your business model towards. And I actually, one of the things I think is an interesting analog to this is the introduction of a compelling electric vehicle that arguably kicked off much of the sort of current furor, actually followed a more similar business model to what a level 4 oriented program would do than a level 2 one. In the sense that it started at the top of the market, incorporating all the technology that, while expensive, made it a compelling product today. Right? It was quick, it had the range that it required, it looked good. Right? These were all attributes that made it a compelling product and allowed it to satisfy the need, even though it was expensive. With the expectation that it would be costed down over time, as we saw, at the beginning of the stock. Some of that has been driven by various technologies coming down in price over time. But I just want to put a finer point on including the sort of commercial strategy that's taken. If you aim at developing level 4, you behave differently. You target fleets. You expect that you're going to bake in a lot higher costs initially for all the sensors that you need. Even if you're not sure you need it, you're going to use it, right? Because that would getting the market a year earlier is so much larger market opportunity for you than the incremental costs you will incur on a per vehicle basis that you can solve by it. So I think you behave very differently if you're developing one which is the other.
So you develop a system that's got
6 nines, 7 nines, 8 nines.
9 nines, I don't know.
Enough nines.
It's darn perfect, right? There's lots of folks here investing in and developing teleoperation businesses. For those folks who think, wow, when my supposedly smart car gets confused and stuck, I need a backup system to do something with it, get it to the side of the road, get it home, get it safely somewhere. Others believe if you still need teleoperation, you're not ready for prime time. Go back to the track and figure it out. Where are you guys?
I'm taking this one?
Get it.
Good. I was excited. So I guess it depends on how you use teleoperation, I think. So I am not one who believes that the AI apocalypse is upon us within the next couple of years.
The AI apocalypse? Okay.
Whatever you want to call it, the singularity, the machine learning is going to grow up and kill the
Skynet.
Yeah. Skynet. So I don't believe that's happening in the next couple of years. And that means that we're not going to have a solution for general intelligence, general artificial intelligence, which means there's going to be a set of things that the car's not going to really understand what to do with. Now, the good news about driving is an awful lot of safety means don't bump into the other stuff, right? Right, and that's what it boils down to fundamentally. And so I think what you have to get to is a system that doesn't bump into the other stuff, and then most of the time knows what to do. And then every once in a while, if something bizarre happens, it's okay for it to phone home, right? And if that phone home takes the form of teleoperation, then you avoid having to solve general artificial intelligence. Because otherwise, it has to figure out, what do I do when, I don't know, Bozo the Clown is in the street and there's a tree falling behind it, right? We just have a remote operator look at that and says, take a U-turn, go somewhere else, right? And so, that avoidance of general AI, I think, is an important reason for teleoperation.
So is that part of your system?
Yes.
Well, it seems like a reasonable thing to do.
There you go.
I should highlight there are many different flavors of teleoperation,
Yes.
right?
So another general thought. I constantly get people approaching me, telling me that they're going to provide pervasive, permanent, continuous connectivity because you can't drive autonomous cars without perfect connectivity and the cloud in charge of the car all the time and communications between cars and between the cloud and with the infrastructure has to be there. And the next guy says, that's crazy, everything's local, cars aren't going to be talking to anybody. It might be nice, but it's not necessary. Again,
I can
where
take this
are
one.
we?
It's a natural follow-on to the last question,
I
right?
do feel like you're lining up a bunch of bubbles that we're just supposed to. like, okay.
They're called softballs.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Sorry.
Softballs don't anger half the audience.
Right. There is a good, yes, there's clearly a set of people that are going to lynch us.
Like 3 people have walked out literally during this conversation. I don't know if this is related. So a couple of things on here, right?
One of them's a person who works for us.
This is no good. You're hearing a pervasive theme here, right? Between actually the last 2 questions you've asked and now this one. In that,
Because I think twisted. But.
no, actually, I think it's a fairly fluid line of questioning, right? One was around do these come to market versus fleets of personally owned vehicles, and my argument was bring it to market early with a safe, compelling product, and you can cost it down over time. You then ask, do you do teleoperation? And Chris says, well, at some point the singularity will happen, but until it does, bring it to market early with the backstops that you require in terms of a teleoperator who's occasionally phoning in.
Bring it to market safely.
Safely,
as early as possible.
safely, and then quickly, and then broadly.
As a duet.
Again,
Yes.
but then finally, I think the question that you just asked, I think is philosophically directly in line with each of the former 2, and that is, do we wait until ubiquitous, infrastructural from connectivity to V to X type technologies are in place such that we can expect to rely on them to satisfy the safety case? And
even if you did, all the cars that are out, the millions of cars that are out there now, aren't so equipped.
So do you have a perspective on this, Mark?
Maybe.
Mark,
Should we wait? So I'm not going to anger Mark with my answer to this question, but that is, it's just to get this to market right now, to get this market safely, quickly, and broadly, we are designing it such that it doesn't rely on things that are outside our control, right? Among them, all of the infrastructure in a given city in which we operate, right? We can't expect that to be, everything that we would ultimately desire. We can't expect all the other vehicles on the road to suddenly have 5G connectivity and V to X and dedicated short-range communication, everything else. We can't expect that the general artificial intelligence problem will have been solved, and we don't require occasional, we don't occasionally see clowns or women in wheelchairs chasing ducks. So we expect that some of these things will, from time to time, happen, and we'll encounter them. But when it comes to the safety case, though, I think I've answered most of your question.
Yep.
But
let's do the next one. The next one in that series.
It's been a long day.
The next one in that series is right. You've got lots of folks who believe that the key thing, amongst a lot of others, but the key thing to invest in, understand, deploy is LiDAR. You need festoon your car with LiDARs, and you will be fine.
Festoon has a negative connotation to it.
Oh, they look great. And others say, wait a minute, humans drive with eyes.
Yeah.
And perception done well enough should be able to, why can't we do perception without super expensive, complicated LiDARs? And I'd love to hear your answer.
Am I?
This is another follow-on to the same thread, right? So you take it.
We're going to go safely, and then we're going to go quickly, and then it'll be broadly.
And then we'll have some fun.
And there'll be a quiz afterwards. So yes, there's an existence proof. People use eyes to drive. They don't have laser beams in their foreheads. That said, there's a lot of ways people solve problems that are different than the way we get computers to solve problems, because computers are good at different things than people are. Our perspective on this is, at some point in the distant future, probably there is a car that drives itself just with cameras, right? We'll figure that out.
Everywhere without teleoperation in every environment.
Possibly,
At high speed.
It probably flies from time to time.
It's still unlikely that the V2X is the play problem.
You've just ticked off our regulator.
Here's another one. I'm sorry, sir. So we do think that lasers are a tool to help accelerate the opportunity to deliver this technology to market safely, right? And we look at the failure modes. We think that they are partially orthogonal to the failure modes you would see with radar and from camera, and so that makes the thing more robust. Today, yes, they are expensive when you buy 5 of them, but if you've taken these things apart, there's not actually anything fundamentally expensive in them. So when we actually go through DFM for this, when we actually get volumes, right, there's no reason these things will not be, a few $100s.
In the same range as radar.
Right, radar was thousands and thousands of
And
dollars.
if and when vision gets good enough, you pull the letter off, right? It's
Right.
not, these aren't, yeah.
So others come to me and say, can't do autonomous driving without HD mapping. You got to pre-map everything.
Yep.
When you deliver a car, unless the world's mapped, it's lost.
Yep.
And others say,
That's
we
crazy.
can go into new areas and figure it out.
Yep.
Why can't the robot?
I'll start maybe.
Quickly.
Exactly. These are, I don't know how you orchestrated this, but everything is sort of single-threaded on this one message. On this one though, maps are a helpful way of encoding what is fundamentally relatively inexpensive sort of tribal knowledge, right, of the fleet.
Okay.
We can argue about what level of fidelity is required. We can argue about what you want to encapsulate in those maps. But at the end of the day, all maps are is a mechanism for encapsulating and providing to every vehicle knowledge of the world that may, for whatever reason, not be available to it in the moment. Whether it's occluded by something, whether there's thick fog, whatever it is. So maps are useful from that perspective. When it comes to sort of limiting the set of difficult problems in what is fundamentally a very complex technology to bring to market, ultimately you trade either we build maps and we leverage what we know, and that's a fairly low risk way of doing that, or we attempt to solve a much larger set of problems when we've already got a bunch on our plate.
Right. So there's this weird conundrum with HD maps, though, right? You don't know, maybe you do know, that road was mapped 2 hours ago, yesterday, a month ago, a year ago, whenever it was. Yeah. Something could have changed in the intervening time. Then your perception system says, I see something, and it disagrees with the map. Now you've got the quandary of, what do I believe? My perception system that says, right now it looks like this, and the map that says, well, wait a minute, we know what it's supposed to be like. Which one do you go? How do you drive through that?
So I think that
do you have to assume the map is wrong?
No, but you have to identify when it is, right? So safety is fundamentally a game of statistics, right? Planes don't never fall out of the sky. They fall out of the sky at a very particular failure rate, right? And we talked earlier about some number of sufficiently good nines, right? We didn't say it has perfect. It's some are enough nines. So we look at maps and we say this is a capability, a technology, something that most of the time is right, and most of the time will improve the performance of the vehicle. And then some small fraction of the time, maybe it's 1% of the time, the map is actually out of date and wrong. And we need to be able to deal with that and handle it gracefully. But we shouldn't throw away the other 99% of the time, right? The factor of 100 benefit that we saw from the map being right the rest of the time. And so yes, we have to detect it. We have to be able to handle it gracefully in some way. But you know, like, don't throw it out.
Yeah, I would maybe add to that. I think I get the sense that there's a general perception that building and maintaining HD maps is an enormous operational burden, and there's no reason that any more than one company should ever do this, right? I think there are a couple of things that I would highlight where I think our thinking differs from that. The first is that HD maps, as you know, we call them, or maps that are used for localization, some other things, have the useful property of typically having been built with the same set of sensors that you require for safely navigating through the world, right? The same sensors that you typically you use to identify dynamic actors that aren't part of the map are the sensors that were used for building it. And therefore, anytime you have vehicles in the world actually fulfilling rides, you are constantly collecting data and observing where you see differences in the geometry of your surroundings from what you previously mapped. And so differencing that and identifying sort of places where that's changed is not quite the operational burden that I think some may assume that it is.
Updating is not like doing a whole new base.
That's right. And I think the second part of it is recall that maps, that if we are to deploy initially in constrained operational design domains, within certain geographies on certain roadways, there is already an assumption that the operational mapping burden is contained, right? So you want to go into a new city and you say, we've got, X hundred miles of new roadway and new intersections that we need to map. That is a contained operational preparatory challenge. But once it's done, the maintaining of that map, once you're operating that city, the collection of the data and things, you're not sending out tracer vehicles. You are collecting the large majority of this data just from
fleet cars,
just from the fleet that's already operating.
Okay, cool, great. So if you're running around with cars that are collecting all kinds of data, right? They got 1 million cameras, LiDARs, radars, all kinds of sensors. They're generating, I don't know, terabytes and terabytes of data per day, and you're getting it somehow moved somewhere to clean it up and store it and figure it out and eventually get it to the guy who's looking for corner cases so he can go fix algorithms. Is this data pipeline problem, is this data thing a big problem, or we've all talked about this is petabytes of data. I think Amazon's probably happy to have it, but how do you manage it?
With difficulty? No, so this is one of the things where, starting the company, in 2017? I guess it's 17. We got to live, we got to leverage the fact that the world had built cloud computing infrastructure. And we got to leverage the fact that people understand how to kind of turn data into representations and information, right, through modern deep learning techniques. And so one of the things the other metaphor that isn't, don't try jumping higher to learn to fly, that we use at the company now is don't build a ladder to the moon, right? And there is a circuitous path I'm taking to get to the point here. But the metaphor we use internally is this: don't build a ladder to the moon, right? And the challenge with building a ladder to the moon is that it feels good every day because you come out and you put a little foot on the top of it and you get a little bit higher and you look around and it's great. And obviously the problem is you never get there. Whereas in contrast, if you actually spend the time to engineer, build the rocket and fuel it, it feels like you're making no progress because the thing just sits there on the ground, and then one day you light it, and 3 days later you're at the moon. And so at Aurora, this has been kind of what we think is one of our advantages, is that we understand where we need to get to. We understand what the road looks like, and so we're building the software infrastructure. We're taking the kind of the business infrastructure so that we actually can build that rocket and fuel it, rather than kind of build a prototype, put it on the road,
and go, oh my goodness, there's a lot of data.
That's a lot of data.
That's a lot of data.
Who's got another hard drive?
Or, by the way, that algorithmic approach seemed really clever, but it doesn't solve this problem that we didn't think about. And so now we're going to patch it, and then we're going to go solve this problem we didn't think about. And then we're going to patch it, and oh crap, it didn't really solve it, so we're going to have to reinvent the whole thing again. And then we're going to repeat over and over again.
Right.
And so this is part of what we think we have at Aurora, is an understanding of the landscape, understanding how to solve it, and understanding that it matters to go build the infrastructure first, rather than focus on kind of demo engineering for the near term.
Your comment there just raised another question that I wanted to ask, and it goes back to some history. When you got started at Google, that was kind of before the deep learning era, and you made real progress on one path, and obviously at some point the world changed. Can you talk a little about sort of that realization and what it meant? How hard is it to let go of sunk cost and sunk engineering and redo, rewrite, modernize, whatever it is?
Yeah.
That was an interesting event that I'm not sure a lot of people have heard the story of.
So I think first, there's a ton of super smart people at Google, and the team that I helped build there, I couldn't be prouder of, right? That's a great people, and a great set of people. And we we learned along the way, and we were one of the first teams at Google, honestly, using deep learning. But there's a difference between incorporating a technology on top of an architecture that exists and being able to approach a problem. I'm sure many of you have been through this, right? Where you get a legacy system in place, and you understand both. First, you view the world through the lens of that legacy system, right? You think about the way you're using data and information based on how that architecture exists. And you maybe have a little research team off on the side that's trying something completely novel, but switching that bit in and replacing core parts of a running infrastructure is an incredibly difficult thing to do. And this is where we talk about at Aurora. One of the fortunate things is we had nothing when we started, right? We had a clean sheet of paper, and there's a part of me that would have absolutely loved, to have be able to operate from the code base that we had at Google. And then there's the other part of me that was thrilled that we now got to say, okay, how should we structure the motion planning problem so that we can make it more efficiently able to consume data and apply machine learning to it?
Knowing what we know now.
Knowing what we know now about the shape of the problem. Knowing what we know about where machine learning is and where it's likely to go over the next little while. And so that for us has been a real accelerant. There's some cool things that we can't talk about that are leading to us being able to basically close the loop around engineering much more rapidly than I was able to do it in other jobs in the past.
Thank you. Interesting problem. I feel like I need to switch to a topic we all hate to talk about, but love to discuss. Let's talk about regulation and right. Sorry, we got to do it.
We already lost our regulatory guy.
Where do we begin? Aren't you both regulatory guys now? You have to be. So let's. Fortunately, and maybe you can talk about it some more. Fortunately, so far, the government's been, I'd say, surprisingly hands-off and surprisingly tolerant of experimentation and development, and they've had hearings, and it seems like they're listening a little bit. But at the same time, it is an industry that worries about safety, and government tends to want to get involved. Talk to us about how you guys view what do you think is going to happen, and how do you prepare for it?
You're the regulatory guy.
I'm the regulatory guy.
You are today.
That will be my epithet for the day.
You're the regulatory guy. So first, I think that I actually think the U.S. government is actually doing a pretty good job of this, right? So they're doing their best to stay on top of the space, right? They are actively talking to folks. They're requesting input. We're seeing that both at the federal and at the state level. NHTSA's job is to keep the roads safe, right? But not to do that while still enabling commerce. And they have to make trades between, basically the practicality of an implementation. And I think where they're at right now is there is not enough information for them to really make those trades in a meaningful way. And so I think that the approach they're taking of saying, here's some guidelines, effectively do these things to show that you're not being ridiculous. We're pretty confident that if you're being thoughtful and operating in this way, that you're not introducing an unreasonable amount of risk on the road. Don't prove us wrong. Because we certainly, as the regulators, they've got a lot of tools they can use to kind of forestall bad actors. And so I guess the answer is, as Aurora, we see our job as to, again, push this technology forward safely and to engage with the regulatory bodies and the legislative bodies so that they can make informed decisions. Right, and it's part of my role at my prior employer was spending time with the good folks at NHTSA and DOT, and helping them understand where we're at, how we're thinking about this problem, and then listening to them because there's a bunch of smart people there, right? They're not AV experts, but they are experts on policy. They're experts on regulation. They understand the risks in the automotive space, and so it's really about ensuring that we are able to have a dialogue with them, and not surprising them. Because the worst thing that we can do is force them into a situation where they're required to respond in a knee-jerk fashion because of an event that they didn't know about, right?
So exactly. So you guys behave and do a good job, and Zooks does, and Pony does, and whoever. Lots of guys do, and Cruz does, and raise your hand.
If you're here, you do a good job.
You're doing a good job. Raise your hand. Right?
I'm actually not sure.
Some other guys who didn't come.
Yeah, those guys.
But then, the venture office gets in yet another business plan from a guy who's going to do an aftermarket, strap it on, and you have an autonomous car kit. Rock and roll, baby, $5,000. It's on.
I believe we should fire.
It's on Indiegogo, right? How do you, and he goes and does something, right? He hooks up his truck on the farm and goes barreling down the road. And the government reacts. Should there be a third party that developers can use to say, should Exponent or somebody say, I know how to help you do 26262, I know how to help you not make a fatal mistake? Before they go driving down the road, or then everybody gets caught in that problem.
Am I still the regulatory guy? Or are you taking this?
No, that's yours, Sterling.
I can take this one. Right now, the technology is in such a state of developmental flux for many. I would be surprised if someone could hold up their hand as, I am ground truth, and I will validate all your systems. And like Chris said, to NHTSA and DOT's, much to their credit, they spent a lot of time with us. This is in both of our prior places. They spent a lot of time trying to understand and recognizing that, look, we're not going to be as close to the AV technology as you are because you're the ones in the trenches developing it, but building that relationship of trust. And we think that there's a couple of different angles of this that are important, right? One is on the regulatory side, as Chris discussed. The other is on the public side, right? One of the things that many years ago I personally dealt with an event for a program that I was leading that had, society started to ask some pretty hard questions, right? When a person died in one of our cars. And it became very apparent that just naturally people their encounters with the bad news will be amplified, right? Those are the things that are going to make it out there.
Right.
And so we think it's incumbent on us to help educate not only the regulators as to sort of the approaches that we're going to take, but also the public as to, look, here are the benefits that we're attempting to deliver, right? And being transparent in as much as possible as to sort of the process, transparent as to the technology, what they should expect, as to some of these voluntary self-assessments, to provide some degree of visibility to the public that sort of how we are going to confirm that what we're putting on the road is something that they can be confident with their children crossing crosswalks with these cars out there. Yeah. So we think it's a big educational component right now because of the high degree of flux in the technology is the short answer.
Great, super. Let me change gears again. Let's talk money. This doesn't happen for free. And
Am I the money guy?
the press says you're raising money.
So they do.
CEOs' jobs are always to raise money, so that's a given. So let me give you.
Called you the money guy.
I guess I'm the money guy.
Let me give you a couple of minutes to sort of tell the funding story. From bootstrap to first investors to where you are now, if you want, and if you want to do the get out your checkbook thing, we'll pass the hat.
Pass the hat, yeah. Interesting. So I guess where we are is, we started the company a couple of years ago. I was very fortunate to spend some years at Google, made a little bit of money, and used that to help seed the company. And then as we've been building it, we've been fortunate to attract some great people to kind of be on the journey with us. And for us, it's, we recognize that this is not a kind of, in 2 years, we're going to have hockey curve growth and, off to the races as kind of a normal Silicon Valley company. This is about investing in engineering for a while, to get to what will ultimately be a transformational and societally important, but also economically important company. And so we went looking for investors that were, understood the risk, understood what they were signing up for, and were good people. And so the folks that we brought into our Series A were Index Ventures and Greylock Ventures, and in particular Reid Hoffman and Mike Volpe. And Reid, was part of PayPal, and then founded LinkedIn, is on the board of Microsoft. He's somebody who knows a little thing or two about kind of building companies and building good companies, honestly. And then Mike Volpe was Chief Strategy Officer at Cisco, and so he knows a little bit about software hardware businesses. And so those kind of experiences are super relevant to what we're up to. And then we've also, through the years, worked with partners, and they've paid us for the work we've done with them, and so that's allowed us to be very kind of capital efficient over the last couple of years. And then we'll need to bring some more money in at some point.
And are you asking or expecting your partners to invest, or intentionally keeping them as customers?
Ultimately, our business model aligns incentives pretty well between all of the partners in the ecosystem, not just on the automotive side, on the OEM side, but also on the transportation network side, the fleet management, the fleet maintenance, fleet leasing, as well as some of the supply chain to supply some of the hardware to the OEM. So ultimately, the alignment of incentives we think is pretty strongly conveyed via our commercial model. Okay. I don't think we're going to talk too much about who we let invest into what.
Okay. That's fine. Anybody want to invest? Pass the money, please. Pass the checks up front. Anyway.
If you can put that kind of money in a hat, please, I'd love to meet you.
You never know. You never know who's in the room.
You never know. I'm quite
I'd like
serious
your autograph. Yeah. So we talked a lot about how hard it is to navigate roads and highways and streets and cities. What if you had a third dimension? What if you don't have to deal with pedestrians and dogs and ladies in wheelchairs? There's guys developing full stack products for VTOL and flying cars and drones and such. Is that, and some of your same customers who want to drive around on us to terra firma also want to fly. How do you, where are you in thinking about that, engaging with customers on that? Is that in your future?
Safely?
Are we flying?
Quickly?
Are we flying?
Broadly.
Make an announcement. Tell us you're flying.
So I mentioned previously the sort of three vectors on which we evaluate sort of what we do in terms of operational design domains. I'll call that the other operational design domain.
Yep.
Commercial opportunity we won't talk too much about here. Complexity, certainly lower on a sort of per space basis.
In some dimensions.
Yeah, I can't even say per mile up there, but yes, in many dimensions. Severity obviously gets a little different, but no, that's not something we're doing right now. Right, our expertise, just for the same reason, which we're not building cars and we're not building a transportation network. That's not where our expertise is.
Okay.
That's not where sort of job zero lies.
Totally agree, and obviously there is appeal, right? Once you actually get off the ground, there's a lot less stuff to hit, so that feels like that part's certainly easier.
We'd have to work on a bird detector.
We'd have to work on a bird detector, yeah, but I don't know, maybe. But we talked about being in a regulated space. When you think about the complexities of those vehicles operating in a much more regulated space, and for them to be useful, we're talking about a 2 to 3 order of magnitude, maybe more, number of flights per day. That's something that the FAA infrastructure just doesn't support. And I think that actually will be the tallest pole, is how do you fit it into the existing aviation infrastructure?
Okay, so even if you guys aren't developing it, do you want a flying car?
They seem cool.
I enjoy the fifth element. That was
awesome.
That was cool.
All right, so last question, then we're going to open it up for more questions from these guys. But you have shown the LiDAR picture of the lady in the wheelchair with the broom chasing the ducks on the street, and at one point that was your funniest and most amazing corner case.
Yep.
You've now done billions of miles more.
No, not billions. Not billions.
All right, how much?
Millions, I think.
Millions, okay.
He's not Tesla, come on.
Wow!
I mean, the last time, I do have to give history behind that, because the last time he and I spoke together, he was at Google and I was at Tesla.
Yep.
And this came up, sort of a bit of a...
Who's got more miles?
So
Who's
I felt like
bigger?
we need to close that loop now that we're on a panel together again.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was really proud of the million or so miles we'd done at the time. We do 1 million miles every 8 hours.
It was 10 at the time, but yes.
Okay, so you've driven a lot more miles, and you've driven even more miles in a previous life.
Fractionally.
What's the? Give us some more amazing corner cases we wouldn't have believed were possible.
So I wish I had something funny to say. So actually, the funniest thing I have is that I actually met someone who knows the duck. And apparently the duck is actually a community celebrity. And it's not a duck. I think it's a pheasant. Apparently. So yes, somebody brought me a feather from the pheasant. They were interviewing with us.
You haven't had Chinese duck yet?
No, apparently it's a pheasant.
So we do have a meme at the company, and this is public knowledge if you search through the California DMV records. We had one of our operators braked to avoid a squirrel in the road and was rear-ended.
They brake gently for the squirrel.
The robot braked.
No,
for the squirrel.
they were manually driving it. They stopped for a squirrel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But the good news is we captured this all on fairly high-resolution cameras, and we have a picture of a very startled squirrel looking up at this odd-looking vehicle that's just saved its life at the expense of being rear-ended. So.
Yeah. As far as we know, the squirrel ran off. So.
Awesome. Everybody, let me thank them so far. And somebody's got the microphones and the stuff so we can get some questions that were better than mine. Stacy, why don't you start?
Hi.
Hi.
I don't know what it is. Great talk. Thank you. You've recently joined PAVE, Partners in Automated Vehicle Education. This is something I'm very excited about because if I see one more survey that says half the people don't believe we should ever have self-driving cars, they'll never trust them, etc., I'm going to kind of lose it. So we need to educate the public. But in the spirit of safety and regulation, what can we offer to the public that would assure them that this system is safe? Can you and the rest of PAVE or everybody who's developing an automated system think about what would a driver licensing system be, or some mode of saying, we all agree, this is safe?
I'm the regulatory guy. So first, that 50% of people would never ride in a self-driving car. I actually think that's awesome because that means 50% of people would, and sometimes it's 60% wouldn't, but still 40% of Americans would ride in a self-driving car, and it doesn't exist. So I always take heart in those. So yes, we're part of PAVE. We do think it's important because we think that there is a lot of confusion about what the different levels mean. As engineers, we can kind of sometimes understand them. I think SAE has actually done a really nice job recently of coming up with a graphic that kind of explains it well. I think the heart of your question of is there effectively a driving test we could give to these vehicles? The answer is practically no. I think that this is a very complicated engineered system, and what we need to do is find a way. First, we need to convince ourselves that it's safe. Then we need to be able to tell that story in a way that is coherent to the regulatory bodies, and then we need to translate that to people, right? To the people who are going to ride in it, so they can have confidence. But there unfortunately isn't a simple answer, right? In the same way that if we tried to justify that a 737 is safe, right? There isn't a single test we would point to say that, right? We would look to the engineering work that's gone into it. We'd look at the processes that they followed in building that. We'd look at, the regulator looks at it and says, here's the data set that we believe, right? And I think we have to do the same thing with this kind of technology. But it's going to be nuanced at first until we figure out how to explain it.
Good. A follow-on to that same question: what's the process of producing the data, the body of evidence that can convince a skeptic that indeed the system is safe, without compromising your intellectual property? Because people are going to have questions. If you depend on a simulation, you're not going to want to reveal the guts of the simulation. How do you convince people you really have achieved the safety target?
Yeah, sure. I can take a crack.
Yeah.
So, as I think relevant to what Chris was just saying, the validation burden for these systems is so large and varied in sort of its complexity that I think for the similar reason for which a simple driving test would be insufficient to capture sort of all of that nuance, so would any kind of rote requirement that a certain set of things are shown. I think many self-driving companies, and I can't start to speak for most, but I can certainly speak for ours in the sense that we think of this at many levels of the stack, right? There is a heavy use of simulation, heavy use of sort of on-road development. Ultimately, that process, I do expect that we'll be explaining to regulators the process that we've followed, right? In fact, our entire ecosystem of partners all has a vested interest in ensuring that any vehicles that they put on that go on the road that have our driver in them, that driver is safe. Any transportation networks obviously aren't going to want to put their riders into our car unless it's been confirmed safe. So there is a lot of, I think, ecosystem level vetting of that product. Now, this may not be, all of this may not be open to the public. It probably wouldn't be intelligible to the public to begin with. But everything from, for instance, evaluating relative to what has become a fairly granular set of NHTSA statistics on different accident types, severities, locales. We can certainly use that as a benchmark against which to compare a statistical validation of the system that uses some combination of on-road and in-simulation tests, right? And provided that the numbers around that bear out a statistical confirmation of, you are in fact, better than the sort of mean sort of bar set by humans. That's something that we expect that we'll be discussing pretty deeply with regulators and with various partners that are involved in deploying it.
And all of this, of course, is wrapped within a some form, some functional safety process, right? And I guess to me, it boils down to there needs to be somebody that we trust and somebody that the public trusts, right? And from our perspective, we need to trust them in that we need to be willing to have fairly detailed conversations with them about why we did what we did, and why, or maybe not even why we did what we did, but why we believe the outcome of our analysis. And then that needs to be an entity that the world trusts, right? And in our case, I think that's probably NHTSA, right? That is their role in the U.S. transportation.
Right, and remember, Dieselgate and things like that have proven once again that as soon as you set a test and design to the test, you can pass the test and prove nothing.
Would that be a third-party certification with that?
Well, I don't think it's a third-party certification. I think it's a second-party conversation, right? I think it's a conversation we have with NHTSA. Yeah.
Bill?
Yeah, so let's talk about competition. So I'm just wondering, what is your, again, okay, what was your technological breakthrough or paradigm shift or whatever, aha moment that makes you guys better than all of the other guys? The Waymos and the Drives and the Ponies and the Prontos and all the Chinese and what's cruising?
I think a bunch of those were.
So,
yeah.
What is the sort of, what was the big aha that gives you high confidence that you're going to beat all these other guys?
I think we would no sooner educate the public on all of the nuances of our safety case than we would talk through all of these things that we do differently. But maybe I can start with the sort of philosophical underpinnings of why we've done what we've done. And then maybe we can tease out, maybe you can think while I'm talking as to what some examples might be. That we'd be willing to share in a room that I know has a lot of competitors in it.
So maybe I could. So I think the short answer is we know where we're going. Right, like in that, Drew has been working in machine learning in robotics for 20 years. He's one of the world's experts. He understands the right kind of techniques, not for figuring out whether that's a cat photo on the internet, but in doing locomotion with robots. Sterling has actually shipped the closest thing to a self-driving car with Tesla and autopilot. The team that I led at Google has kind of gone the farthest down the road, as far as I can tell, of anyone. And so that means that as a team, we have a fairly unique and diverse set of understandings of the problem space, and we kind of understand what it's going to take to get to the finish line, and we think that rough idea of how to get there is more than many folks have starting in this space.
Yeah, and the world of 2017 is very different, looking at it from a sort of computational availability, sensor availability, machine learning expertise in 2017 than it was in 2009, certainly, even than it was in 2014, right? So inevitably, the approaches that we would have taken in the past would have been colored by the landscape in which we operated. Having been through that, any of you who have written code will appreciate how difficult it is to just toss it and do the right thing and just start over, which ultimately would have been faster in many cases, but it's just very difficult to do. You ultimately build up a giant base of a lot of legacy sort of inertia. We didn't have that when we started this. What we did have was a landscape of GPU architectures that were enormously power efficient relative to the bandwidth that they provided. We had a new set of sensor technologies coming on the market that allowed some new and interesting things. Machine learning, sort of the revolution that started 20 years ago, has really accelerated. And as Chris mentioned, Drew has kind of been at the forefront of that and developing some of the application not only to some of the traditional places that in 2009, 2014 we would have more traditionally applied it to in perception, but how do you think about encapsulating many of these machine learning techniques throughout the system in elegant ways that you can still build a safety case around?
All right, we'll kill the safety topic. Next. I want to go back in the room a little bit. Yeah.
Hi, thanks. You talked about how you don't need to invent artificial general intelligence because you can disengage and move to teleoperation as necessary, or you said it's a good idea. I have two questions about this. So the first one is, do you think it could be possible that figuring out when to disengage and doing the handoff safely, that could be also an extremely difficult AI problem? And the other thing is, when you have teleoperation, then you're relying on sort of ubiquitous, low latency communication being available all the time. And do you see that being a bottleneck in the next few years?
Maybe I'll start. So the curve that you're sliding along is the PR curve for certain elements of the system, right? What's your level of precision? What's your level of recall? There are opportunities to be conservative and build a high recall system at the expense of a higher rate of, for instance, false positives, a higher rate of false alarms that are raised. But what I will say about, so that is one area that we have the flexibility to slide along that curve to increase the conservatism of the system, so that we don't have to solve that general AI problem, some of the intricacies of it. It's just there is something, I don't know what it is, I'm going to stop, right? Some of these things you can do, but what I'll also mention, because I think there's, when you mentioned teleoperation and the requirement for low latency systems for that, the latency requirements of teleoperation depend on how you're going to use it. There is a difference between remote control teleoperation and a more supervisory control. Obviously, the former requires much lower latencies than the latter. I won't get too much into detail as to how we think about those things. Certainly, there have been through many years. 10 years ago at MIT, I was looking at some of that. But there have been many years of study on how do you safely teleoperate a vehicle, given different modes of that operation, whether it's remote control, whether it's supervisory control, other things. And I'll just suggest that we have other levers to pull on both of these things, right? Whether it's how good does the system have to be for us to believe that we will have stopped for that weird event for which we'll ask the teleoperator to support, one, and then two, once the teleoperator has been asked to support, what is the sort of form that support takes, and adapt that to the available sort of latency of your communications.
Okay.
This is a question about kind of changing tack a little bit. I want to ask about the compute side of things. So running machine learning models is really expensive, both in terms of dollars and watts. What do you see as being the challenges in compute hardware right now for autonomous vehicles, and how do you see computer architecture or compute hardware evolving to meet that? And are you baking that into your assumptions? How do you see that?
So I think the I think the hardest part, and I'm certainly not an expert in this area, right? This is where we have other people dramatically smarter than me. My model is that the fundamental challenge is we don't know what we're doing, right? Like we're still actually figuring out the right structure of the network to solve the problem. And that means that we're using, more general purpose compute than we might otherwise be able to do. Once we actually figure out the shape of the network and kind of the exact details of the workload, at that point, optimizing the silicon to solve it will be relatively straightforward. Relatively, right? So then we'll be able to build exactly the coprocessor, the ASIC, whatever you want to think of it as, that'll drop the cost out of this fairly dramatically. And I think we've seen we see that already. Folks like NVIDIA, right? It's not one monolithic processor. They're picking off certain workloads and they're creating subsections of the chip to do one particular task very efficiently. And I think you'll just see that accelerate. And yes, we kind of expect that the world will continue to move along and help provide computation hardware that'll meet this need.
Maybe to tag onto that with slightly less humility than you use. When Chris says we don't know what we're doing, he means
where's Kobe?
She means we're just bumbling along.
A quotable moment.
Chris Urmson, we don't know what we're doing.
So just related to this, a long time ago there was an AI competition in Edmonton, Alberta, and the idea was to build a robot that could register for the conference and then go give a talk about itself. I was a grad student, my PhD advisor was there, and we had been up all night, and he came over and was like, doing the advisor thing, making sure we weren't doing anything stupid. And I, in a moment of pique, said something like, "Don't worry, we're not doing anything stupid," right before we launched it, and my bit of software cut in line, which was bumped the head judge out of the way. It was fantastic. So yes.
So we try not to do anything stupid. And we like to believe that we have some perspective on where the computational hardware requirements are going. We've architected, we're now on our third generation of computer that we've developed in-house. We are using silicon from a combination of different places. We're not taping out silicon at the moment. But we've designed it to be modular specifically for that reason that Chris just mentioned, right? We appreciate that the computational needs will evolve over time as the system is refined. We just don't have the system done yet, and so we're trying to protect for that.
Mark?
You indicated earlier the benefit, I talked about the benefit of having common development across different applications, different partners, and I can see obviously that you want to develop once for multiple applications. Do you see room for differentiation between applications, between OEMs or use cases?
Yeah, we do. And we think that differentiation best serves society and best serves our partners when they do it in the experience and the value-added services they can build around the driver, right? At the end of the day, if we're competing on which driver is less likely to kill you, we've lost, right? Just like Boeing and Airbus, it would be problematic if they were telling you, hey, our accident rate is slightly lower than those other guys. So we believe that there is a performance threshold, there is a safety threshold that has to be achieved before launching a product like this. When it does launch, we believe there's enormous opportunity for differentiation. There's enormous opportunity in a new market that is fundamentally just enormous. It's very large. I'm using enormous too many times. But that opportunity for automakers is how do you build an interior, how do you build an experience that allows many of these different activities that people just really want to be able to have in their car? How do you build some of the value-added services around it, right? When it comes to a lot of the things that frankly Tesla has pioneered with respect to sort of customizing the vehicle to you, both adaptively and preemptively. Ultimately for transportation networks, it's how do we build a reliable network that can, with very high service levels, very low wait times, very efficient performance. So we do think there's a ton of differentiation opportunity. We think that doesn't happen in the driver, right? We see the driver as the enabler for unlocking a lot of this opportunity for the ecosystem.
One last question. Back there.
As a follow-on to that, then, just made me think, but I mean, if you look at cars today, there is actually a lot of sort of software-defined driver differentiation available as far as the human input, right? You can select different driver modes. Do you see something like that in the future with the self-driving?
Is there a grandma to Porsche knob?
Sports.
Yeah. It's probably too early to talk too much about that. I think getting the product over the market requires that everyone use the same set of hardware, everyone use the same or a very similar set of software. That's job one, right? Job two, additional customizations, unlocking various operational design domains that matter for the ecosystem because several partners have a lot of demand to fulfill in those operational design domains. Those are all things that we'll consider as they come.
So, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's not clear to me that you want that, right? Like, I think when I'm driving a car, there's times when I'm kind of feeling like I want to drive it more sportily or less, right? I want the suspension stiffer or not. I don't remember the last time I was like riding in a car on my way to work thinking, wishing that the Lyft driver was driving more aggressively, right?
I frequently wish that they would stop doing this,
right?
But
so I kind of feel like there's kind of a nominal good driver that is for the experience of riding in the vehicle, and I think maybe you don't need to differentiate on that. But
so, Anderson, Sterling, you used enormous a lot. We want to enormously thank you from me and from everybody. You guys were wonderful. Thank you.